It is 6:30. We have about 20 folks in the room. And so I am going to go ahead and get us started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Felecia Boone. I am the Vice President of the Minneapolis Area Synod, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's voter orientation meeting. And I do want to start with a short prayer to get us started, and then I'll go into logistics, and then I will also introduce our parliamentarian. So the Lord be with you. Good and gracious God, we thank you for bringing us all together on this, what has become a very windy evening. We ask that you ease our fears about voting and what that looks like for the Synod Assembly. We ask that people be open to hearing each other in their questions. And we look forward to putting this knowledge to good use when we meet together for the Assembly. All this we ask in your name. Amen. So just a few logistics. You can ask questions in the chat. So if you open up your chat and have that on your screen, you can go ahead and type that in there, and we'll be paying attention to that. We do invite you also to put your voice into the space. And so you will see that there is a reactions button along the bottom of your screen. If you click that open, there is a raise hand function. We will use that if you want to speak into the group to be able to keep track of who's speaking, and also then our tech support will spotlight you so that everyone can see you. The other thing, excuse me, next to reactions, there's a globe. If you click on that globe, if you are an English speaker, choose English. If you are a native Spanish speaker, choose Spanish. The reason we're asking you to do that is because we do have interpretation tonight, and so you can see our American Sign Language interpreter on screen, but we do also have Spanish interpretation happening as well. And should we have any questions coming from our Spanish speakers, our Spanish interpreters will repeat those questions to us in English. And if you choose English, you'll be able to hear those questions when they're asked. I think that is all for logistics. I am pleased to introduce Judge Tammy Pust, who is our parliamentarian. Tammy has been a parliamentarian for us in the past, and we are so excited to have you back to talk us through voting at the Synod Assembly and Robert's Rules of Order, which can sometimes seem a little pesky and daunting. So I'll turn it over to you, Tammy.
Well, thank you. First of all, I need waved hands if you can hear me. Can people hear me? Great. Thank you. I'm kind of a visual learner and sometimes a visual speaker. So don't let my hand gestures bother you if you need to rely on the ASL interpreter. I'll try and hold mine here to not be distracting. My name is Tammy Pust, and I am a judge, but I'm here as a lifelong Lutheran. Now, I am not a member of your synod, but that's okay because I'm a member of your neighbor synod. So a member of the St. Paul Area Synod. I'm a member at Roseville Lutheran and have been forever. Well, maybe not forever, but it feels like forever. So in my work life, I do legal work. And in my community service work, I try to use what I know about the law to help answer questions when people have them about how processes take place, which is how it is I've been asked to be the parliamentarian for the Minneapolis Synod in the past, for the St. Paul Area Synod in the past, and for various other things. So we're going to talk about parliamentary procedure. but I'm going to tell you right up front, it's boring. It's a boring topic. Nobody wants to hear a big long list of all the rules of what you should and shouldn't do. How do I know this? Because I'm also the parent of 3 children, and I've been told very often that they do not want to just continue to hear me tell them what the rules are. So I'm going to, at a high level, talk about what we're trying to accomplish by having rules. And then I'm going to give you sort of a frame of what those rules are. But mostly then I'm going to stop talking and take your questions so that I can answer what it is that's on your mind rather than me just rattling around about things that may not matter to any of you at all. So, are you still with me? Okay, I'm not seeing as many hands going now. All right, thank you. All right. I'm going to pause for a minute and ask from the interpreters, am I talking too fast? If you're not speaking up, I'm going to assume I'm okay, but somebody will tell me to slow down. Okay. So you have all, I am sure, at various other points of your life, maybe related to your work with the Synod, maybe in your workplaces, maybe in any other organization that you're a part of, you've probably all heard of Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order has been around forever, and it is a structure that organizations often use to try to set a framework in order to accomplish certain shared goals. What are those goals? It's really to make sure that in any organization that involves more than one person who wants to speak, that there is a way to allow people to speak in an organized way so that everyone's voice is heard. That's what the Minneapolis Area Synod cares about. They care about making sure that at General Assembly, coming up, not this week, but next, right? I think it's next. Everybody has a way to share their opinions and their views, not just at their table. You'll be doing a ton of that, and that's great, but with the entire assembly, if in fact you feel a need to do that. And so we want to make that not scary for you. We want to give you some information of how to do that so that you're not intimidated, and that intimidation about things that you don't know makes you not stand up and have your voice heard. We want your voice to be heard. So these rules, and, yes, they're called Robert's Rules. No, I'm sorry, I never knew who Robert was, but I'm sure he was, very important and guy who's got great stories, but all we do is refer to him by name. Robert's Rules is really just the structure that we use to make sure that the really democratic, and I mean that small d, not political, not affiliation, but the democratic process of getting the majority's voice heard. What's a majority? A majority is more than half of a group. What's a group? It's all the individuals who participate. So we're going to have rules at the assembly about how it is that any individual can share their views, and that their views can then be taken into consideration in the decisions that all of you will be called to make. The reason that we do that really is to make sure that we are being open-minded, we're being respectful, we're being open-hearted in terms of allowing a space for people to speak and to be heard. To do that, the rules basically follow what we're used to in all these other organizations, which is basically one person, one voice, right? You don't get to get up at the microphone and speak and then have your brother come up and say exactly the same thing off of a script that you give them. Why? Because it's one person, one vote, and therefore it's also your own views that we want to hear. We also only want to hear one speaker at a time. Why? Because I can't understand what your views are if there's 5 people talking. And so in the assembly, there will be, somebody on staff can correct me here. Usually there's 2 aisles, maybe there's 3 all of which have a different microphone. And so there will be instructions in the materials that you get about where you stand in order to have your voice picked up by a microphone. You're not going to be standing right at your table and just shouting across the room. Why? Because people who have a hearing deficiency like I do won't be able to hear you. So we have rules about one person speaks at a time. We have rules about the majority rules, which means when people make their voices heard and then there's action taken, there are votes. A vote, generally speaking, under Robert's rules, the majority wins, which means anything over 50% of the people who are there and entitled to vote. If there's 51% that vote or 50 plus, then that action is adopted and moves forward. And so majority rules is built into Robert's Rules of Order. Also, minority rights are built into Robert's Rules of Order, which means it's harder under the rules to shut off discussion. Why? Because we don't want to shut off discussion unless we've had a really thorough airing of all the different diverse views that all of you and everybody else at the assembly wants to bring to the table. So, but you will see in the rules when we actually give you the chart, which will be at the end of this, there are specific things that take more than a majority to take that action. Why? Because they're related to cutting off debate. And that's a very serious thing in a small d democratic process, right? We don't want to cut off debate. We want to have people share their views. So we make it harder to do that in the number of votes that it takes to actually prevail on certain motions. One question at a time, majority rules, minority rights are protected. One person, one vote is embedded into Robert's Rules of Order. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And also only members of the organization vote. Now, at the Synod Assembly, that will mean people who are members who are allowed on the floor. That's why you all had to register. We don't just sort of open the doors and let anyone come in from off the street. While we love them all, we don't necessarily want their views on how the Minneapolis area synod should be governed. We want that to arise from the core of the membership. And so that's who you all representing. All right. With that, what are some of the rules? Well, as you know, there's lots of rules about how you can speak and when you can speak. Some of these are in the Robert's Rules. Some of them are just in the agenda that you're going to get at the assembly, right? You're not going to just walk in and at any point in time, including in the middle of the church services, walk up to a microphone and say, I move, which is how we say, I make a motion, I want you to take this action. I move that we sing 5 more songs. That might be a great idea, but we're not really asking for your input on some of those things. So when Robert's Rules are in effect, you'll be able to tell that from the agenda that tells us we are now in a session where we are going to take action on certain items. What are the things that we take action on? Well, you have a committee in your organizational structure called the Reference and Council Committee. And that group has already received from members of the Synod, what are the resolutions, what are the action items that you want to talk about at your assembly? Those have been reviewed with the authors. They've been helped to clarify if some of the language was not plain language. There's been some back and forth about, is this really what you meant to say? Because that seemed inconsistent with that. And the reason that happened, the reason the committee does that on your behalf before the assembly is so that when you're asked to vote on something or express your views on something, the written materials that you're going to have about it are really clear. So you'll know what it is people are asking you to think about, which will allow you then to better express your own opinions about, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Is there something people didn't think about? Or is there something that you really want to share with all the other members about what your views are on it? So that work has already been done. And those resolutions, when they come before you on the agenda, you will then have an opportunity to weigh in on those and to say what you think about them. And then you will have an opportunity to vote about them if you're a registered member of the assembly and on the floor during the voting times. can you call your neighbor across the street and say, I'm going to be gone for 2 hours during the assembly. I'm going to go to lunch. So could you come in here and vote for me? No, you can't. Why is that? Because we don't allow proxy voting. One person, one vote. Why? Again, small d democratic process. That's what we believe in. And so you got to be on the floor when things are happening in order for you to express your views and have a vote. One person, one vote. All right. We also have a lot of rules that you'll see in the materials that aren't just Robert's rules. They're also just the Minneapolis Synod's rules. Why? Because you're not going to be debating these resolutions for 2 weeks. You're all there for like a day and a half. And so there are certain time frames that are allotted for this part of the assembly. And depending on how many people are in attendance, and I don't know, maybe somebody from the Synod can say, but I know it's hundreds, right? Is it 500? Is it less than 500? I don't know. It's a lot of people, right? And as a result, the Synod has adopted some procedures, including everybody who speaks is limited to speaking for 2 minutes. Well, that seems really short. I can tell you when you're standing at a microphone, it sometimes seems very long. So, and why is it short? It's short so that we can get as many people as possible to weigh in on topics. So we're not here to hear from somebody for 45 minutes at the microphone. We're here to hear lots of people's views, which means if you're thinking about speaking on something, good on you. We want you to do that, but think about it beforehand on what you might want to talk about so that you can frame it up within that 2 minutes.
Tammy, we have a question or a correction, I think maybe Felecia.
Perfect. Felecia.
Yes. So the Synod Council did vote to remove that 2-minute limit.
Oh, great. Even better. I took that from the draft of the rules that the reference committee had reviewed. And that's perfect, right? Because it does cut both ways. 2 minutes does seem kind of short. And really, most people's own openness to the needs of others allows us to self-limit when we stand in front of a microphone. It's very unusual that somebody would do a speech for 25 minutes on any of these topics that you'll be asked to. So good on the council for having thought that through and removed that potential rule. So
there is a follow-up though.
Go ahead.
What if someone does go on for a very long time?
Well, there are different rules, different motions that can be made to limit somebody's time at the microphone. And again, when we send you the chart, the only reason we're not sending it to you right now is we wanted to actually meet you a little bit and talk to you. And if we just sent you a chart, we could have just asked for your emails and sent you the chart, which we will do. But if we're going to, I mean, those are motions to limit debate is generally when that comes up. If somebody's just yammering on at the microphone. Now I can tell you, having witnessed this at your organization before, the first thing that happens is not somebody says, can you please sit down? We just don't want to hear from you. That is not what happens, right? People are kind and considerate and want to hear from people as long as we can accommodate that within the agenda that is happening. But if somebody gets disruptive or disrespectful or is just circling around and around saying the same thing that has been said for already the 10, 15 minutes they've been speaking, it is possible then to bring a motion to what's called limit debate. But what it really means is to ask that person to sit down. Why? Is a majority vote good enough on that? No, it's not. It requires 2/3 of the vote of the people on the floor. Why? Because it's a significant thing when we're asking somebody to stop talking, right? Because our whole purpose is we want to hear you. And so it's only a one-off kind of situation where somebody would make that motion, but if they do, that's fine. That motion gets made and seconded, then it would require a 2/3 vote. And at the 2/3 vote, if that is accomplished, there's a 2/3 vote, then that person, it's actually usually the topic that ends, but it can be that particular person as well. So, all right, with that, there are materials. There's not a speaker rule. There's no proxy voting. You heard me say make a motion. again, I think most of you, if you're interested enough to come to this kind of training, I'll bet you know what a motion is. But basically what it is I want the assembly to do something. I want them as a body to take action. So I'm going to stand up the microphone and I'm going to ask you to do that. And the way I do that under Robert's Rules of Order is I say, I move that the assembly does blah, 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 whatever it is. I move that the assembly right now distribute chocolate chip cookies to everyone in the room. So I'm making a motion about chocolate chip cookies. Now, if I did that, first of all, I should have told someone in advance, because they're not going to have chocolate chip cookies for you just because you tell them, but just because you make a motion. But if you've told someone in advance and you've got the cookies there and you just really want to do that, you stand up to the microphone at the appropriate time when we're taking business, and you'd know when that is because the agenda will have it. We're not in church service. We're not listening to some other speaker. We're in a business session. You stand up to the microphone and you say, I move that we take a 20-minute break so that we can have chocolate chip cookies. If it is stunned silence in the room, nothing else happens, you have to sit down and there's no chocolate chip cookies. Why? Because there was no second to your motion. Somebody has to say, I second the motion. Why? Because every organization wants to make sure that when it's being asked to take action, it's not just based on one person's view. Why? Because we're an organization. You get to do whatever you want to do as an individual. An organization is more than one individual. So the first step is to have somebody second it. So now we know, well, at least 2 people in this room want chocolate chip cookies at this time. And that's enough. Now that motion is on the floor, and therefore it can be debated. What does that mean? It could just be that nobody else has anything to say because we are all on the same side of chocolate chip cookies. And so we want to go right to the vote. And we don't want to have a debate about it. We just want cookies. And if that's the case, somebody will say that they call for the vote, which means no more debate. Let's not have debate. But probably what will happen, that's unusual. Probably what will happen is people will have different views on chocolate chip cookies. Somebody will want to get up to the other microphone and say, I love chocolate chip cookies, but I really don't think this is the right time. I think we should do it in 4 hours. They will do that by standing at their microphone. The person who is running the session will alternately call upon the people at the microphone so that we are, randomly getting views. That person introduces themselves, says what their view is. I really don't think we should have chocolate chip cookies right now. It's my view. We should wait for 4 hours. But that's just my view. That's what they say. Okay. And then the person presiding looks at the other microphone, and there's 3 other people that all of a sudden got up and they say, do you have a view? Yes, I do. What is it? I'm gluten-free and I really don't think we should have chocolate chip cookies. I think chocolate chip cookies made with gluten are terrible and we shouldn't have them in the room. Okay. So now there's various views. We go back and forth until there's nobody else standing at microphones who wants to talk about chocolate chip cookies. And then the presiding officer, whoever's in charge, says, I'm going to call for the vote. Looks to me like debate is over. I'm going to call for the vote. Now, again, if you want that to happen before the presiding officer does it, you from the floor can try to call for the vote. I wouldn't recommend it because it cuts off other people's views. So unless it's really important, you don't want to do that. You want to allow people to share their views. But I call for the vote, and so now we're going to have a vote on chocolate chip cookies. And so then the presiding officer says, all in favor of taking a break right now for 20 minutes, say aye or raise your hand. Those are counted. Those against, raise your hand. Those are counted. Somebody wins, somebody loses. We're either having chocolate chip cookies now or we're not. That's the simple one, right? And I hope it happens. And if it does happen, I am gluten-free. So somebody bring gluten-free chocolate chip cookies just in case. But the tougher one is when somebody gets up and makes the motion, I want us to take a break right now and have chocolate chip cookies. And somebody else says, I second that motion. Okay, now it's on the floor. Now we're going to talk about it. And the very next thing is somebody gets recognized at the next microphone and they say, I move to amend the motion. That's different than just telling me what you think about chocolate chip cookies. That's saying, let's not vote about that. Listen to what I have to say. Let's vote about what I want to say. My motion is that we amend this motion about chocolate chip cookies and make it 7-layer chocolate cake. I vote that we amend the motion. I move that we amend the motion so that we're not going to talk about cookies anymore. We're going to talk about cake. Is there a second? If there's no second, I have to go sit down because I only had just my view. Nobody else cared. If I tried to amend and there's not a second, the amendment dies, it doesn't go anywhere further. But we're not done because our motion about chocolate chip cookies is still on the floor. So we're still going to debate it. If the amendment gets a second, now it pushes chocolate chip cookies aside. Now cake is the debate of the day for right now. We're going to talk about whether we're going to actually have cake instead of cookies. We will hear from you. We'll hear from you. We'll hear from you as many times as people want to do that. And then there will be a vote. And what's the vote? The vote is should we adopt the amendment? If the amendment passes, yep, everyone says, yes, we want it to be cake. Okay. But that was an amendment. It's not a standalone motion. So all that means is now we voted to amend, but on the floor now is, right now we should take our break for 20 minutes and have our cake. And so we vote again. Because that's such a silly example, I don't use that to not be serious about what the work is that you're doing. I use the example simply because no matter how important the topic is, whether you're talking about a resolution having to do with the organizational structure of your synod, or if you're taking a vote about, you won't be this time, but I know at some point you'll be taking votes about, who's the bishop. I know at some point Ann Svenningson's term, she is up and she'll either run again or she won't. Those things will happen. Those are substantively more important things than cake or cookies. I get it, but it's the same process. And that's the point. Robert's Rules of Order is just about the process. It's about you stand up, you make a motion, which is your ask to the body to take an action. You have at least one other person willing to say right away, I second that, which basically means I'm with them, I agree. And then the body's going to have a discussion about it. But they're going to do it in this organized way where we recognize you at the microphone and you and you and you until nobody else wants to speak. And then we're going to take a vote on it. And then, depending on if the vote wins or loses, that is the action of the body. So let's say it's a really serious one, like I move that the Minneapolis Synod merge with the St. Paul Synod. That'd be huge, right? That'd be huge organizationally. It would just be huge. It'd have lots of financial ramifications. It'd be huge. If that motion came up and was seconded, and then there is a debate back and forth, and if that motion passed, that is the action of the body. The body has decided to do that, even if you didn't come in there thinking that was going to happen. That's how important these rules are, is to, depending on what it is you want to accomplish at your assembly, know the rules, know when the time is your time to stand up, follow the rules. Why? Because they are built to be open to hearing all the different views so that we, in a small d democratic process, can operate from a majority rules point of view. If most of the people want to do something, then that's what you'll decide to do. If most of your people just decide that's not what they want to do, then that's not what you'll do. And that's how we've sort of made decisions in organizations for over 50 decades since Robert's Rules of Order have been around. So with that, what questions can I answer that will help you feel more confident about when you step up to the microphone to share with your fellow members whatever it is your views are on a particular topic, you'll feel confident about that, and you'll therefore be able to explain whatever your particular opinion is in a way that makes you feel like you've done the job that you came there to do. Stunned silence is not a good response, so think of a question.
There's a question in the chat. If we already have an agenda, how far away from those topics will the assembly allow us to go?
Well, Felecia, you might want to weigh in on this one in terms of the sort of policy level conversations you've had at the council. I'm not a member of the council, so again, I'm only, structure about what the rules can be for any organization. But an organization can answer that question lots of different ways. And so, Felecia, have you guys talked about that?
Briefly, not in depth. Of course, people can bring things from the floor. We're not expecting anything. There's not much that's controversial going on at the present moment.
That we know of, right?
Exactly.
Right. And in every organization, there's things at various levels that the organizers don't always know of, which is why the rules do allow various processes to bring up topics that generally weren't expected. It's harder. Why? Because again, the whole point of an organization is to try to do things in a way that is planful so that everyone can be prepared to share whatever views it is they have on the topic. And if it wasn't on the agenda, people maybe think they need to have read something or, thought about it or discussed it with their own affinity group or something, which they wouldn't have had a chance to do because they didn't know it was happening, which is why Minneapolis asks in their general rules that any resolutions that people are going to bring to the floor go through the Reference and Council Committee so that a group of people that are members of your synod, not outsiders, can help the authors make sure that it's in plain language and it's clear and that it's thought through and it's internally consistent. Also, there is a rule in the Minneapolis Synod, and again, Felecia, weigh in if this changed, that if a resolution, an action, potential action item that's going to be brought to the assembly requires the spending of money, that it needs to identify the source of the funding when it's presented from the floor. So if you're going to ask to do something like that and you didn't know that, and therefore you weren't prepared to say that, that is an easy way that the chair or the presiding officer at the time can say, well, that doesn't meet our requirements, because our requirements are that you identify where the funding's coming from. So think about that in your own preparation. And if you're going to bring something up like that, have a funding source identified so that that doesn't derail you. Was that talked about in any way, Felecia?
Yes. And so I don't remember when that rule was instituted, but absolutely. Needing to know where funding is coming from is vitally important, especially now, given our tenuous financial situation. So that is helpful. Also, resolutions came to us through conference assemblies, right? So there's a deadline for those because of the work that Tammy was talking about, that Reference and Council is working with the authors to make sure that there's clarity. And if they haven't figured out the funding source, they're working with folks to figure those things out too. Let's see if there was
I'm going to take Diane's question in the chat. Okay. So Diane asked, since the 2-minute time limit's been eliminated, if someone's speaking at great length, how does someone go about making a motion to limit debate? Well, again, I will get to the technical answer from Robert's rules, but before you get to doing what Robert's rules thinks, you should do anything else you can think of first, which is if somebody's just yammering on and on and on, you as a compassionate person are going to listen as long as you think that this is making any productive use of everybody else's time in the room, which is kind of a statement. You're going to then, I mean, the bottom line is you can walk up to a microphone and you can make a motion to limit debate. When you do that, obviously the person who's speaking, if they're not anticipating that, or depending on what the topic is, if it's a, personal topic that they're emotionally invested in, upset about, or whatever, you're going to get a normal human reaction, which is people are going to be put off or offended. That does not mean you don't do it, because the other 500 people in the room are probably offended as well at the amount of time that's being devoted to this one topic, if in fact it's not a topic that the assembly was intended to take action on. But are there other things you can do before you stand up and make that motion? Sure. You could think about who's speaking, who knows that person. Is there another person that you could, is there a way to do this in a softer way where you could get a friend or colleague or somebody that they trust to sort of, give them the high sign so that they are not humiliated in front of the whole group? Is that your responsibility? Absolutely not. But you should think about that, given again that we're not talking about a convention of salespeople from IBM, and I don't mean to offend any of you if you all work at IBM, but we're talking about the church, right? So when we as the church gather and take actions, absolutely, we have every right to take the actions, and we'll need to take them if we need to take them, but think about it from your empathetic, compassionate side first. What can you do to get the result that the assembly needs without making it a conflict, especially given the changes that have happened in our world, and people, even use of the word conflict made me stop to think, is that too hard of a word, right? So, but if you can't think of anything else to do, or if you think it's really obvious and that this person is just not going to stop until some formal action is taken, well, then you go stand up at the microphone, you get recognized by the chair, and you make a motion to limit debate. And the chair will know, because that's such an odd, out of the box kind of thing. I mean, not odd, it happens, but doesn't happen at every organization. It happens very infrequently. You need 2/3 of a vote. So you might want to think about that before you step up to the microphone too. You might want to walk around to tables first and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to need 2/3 vote, so that you only have to do it once and you get the votes you need. Nothing wrong with that. It's efficient, and it's a good use of your time, so that the whole thing doesn't fail because it's over 50%, but it's not to 2/3. And then you got to get everybody to read the actual rules where it says here that Minneapolis requires 2/3, and Minneapolis has adopted Robert's rules, and a motion to limit takes 2/3. So not everyone's going to know that. You don't want to waste time on that. So again, if you're going to take the action, I applaud you on that, because you're taking responsibility for the overall good of the organization, but then do that in a way that your action is actually going to succeed. So don't just do it on your own. Talk to other people so that you've got people lined up so that it goes as smoothly as it can go. The next question is from Nancy. Do issues ever get tabled for a future time if the debate is lengthy, or do they generally call for a vote and the majority decides whether or not it goes forward? Tabling a matter that is on debate is also, it's done. It's usually done for one of two reasons. One is because there isn't enough information to get to the end of the discussion. Like, people need to check out something that has come up, but nobody's really sure what the answer is. Or, for example, maybe whatever it is requires funding and nobody knows if there is any, but people aren't willing to say there isn't, but they don't know because they didn't know it was going to happen. So some of that work needs to be done. So there can be a motion to table. When things are tabled at assembly, it does not mean that they die for a year and they're just waiting out there until your next assembly. Under the Minneapolis rules, when something gets tabled, it gets then brought to the next agenda of the sitting council. So the council will take up the debate and have that conversation and decide what to do with it. And so there will be a resolution, and I think, Felicia, do you guys meet monthly or something, I assume?
We, council meets 5 times a year, executive committee meets.
So every other month, it would be as long as, 60 days it might take before you'd get an answer on what was going to happen. So that's one reason that things stop, is because we need more information and we don't have it. Another reason that sometimes issues get tabled is it's a way to place something in a lot of organizations, as a place to just put them so you don't have to vote no, but it can just sit out here forever. But your rules don't allow it really to sit out there forever, because you have this embedded, it goes to the council. So it will get addressed even if it gets tabled at the assembly.
Could I just quickly add, the documents, the resolutions that we have are out on the Minneapolis Area Synod's page, website, under Synod Assembly. Thank you, Pastor Norma, for dropping that link into the chat. So now is a time to familiarize yourself with those resolutions, so that you know what you'll be voting on. And if you have questions now, you can be thinking of the questions that you'll want to ask about a topic.
And last I heard, and it could be different now, but this was a couple weeks ago, there were 3. Now, Diane, do you know different than that? Is there still just 3, or?
I believe
Right
it's
now, there are 3 on the Synod website, the ones that came through conferences and the budget resolutions.
So the only ones that the referencing council dealt with was the ones that came through conferences, which are substantive. The assembly should take action on this thing. They weren't about what the budget should be. Other questions? Because if not, I'm going to say the speech that every Zoom participant loves to hear, which is, I'm going to give you the rest of your time back. So we do have 2 documents for you. One is a kind of a visual chart of how the different motions fit together. Felecia had that document, and I don't know, Emily, if you have that. No, somebody had it, and we'll send it out to every participant here. And then there's also a 1-page chart of the various motions. Does it require a second? Is it a majority vote or 2/3? And how does it, what does it do? So really, if you print these 2 things off, it's all you're going to need, because again, we aren't the sales team at IBM. We are the General Assembly of the Minneapolis Synod. And so people are going to be leading with grace in terms of trying to make sure that everybody has a chance to express their views and to listen carefully to the views of others, and then make their own decision about what's best for your synod, and then vote your conscience on that. So, the chart is already on the Synod website. Great. And then the other one, though, Felecia, the one you had, I don't know if that's there.
It's okay. It's
okay.
I do wanna...
Also, I'm going to put in the chat as soon as I change it to everyone here. This is my name, and this is my cell phone, and I am more than happy to take your calls, texts, whatever, and answer whatever questions that you didn't have today, but that you might have when you are having trouble sleeping and you wake up at 2 o'clock and you're wondering, what was that whole thing about motions to amend on cakes and chocolate chip? Am I going to need to know that one? Probably the answer is no, but if you do, feel free to reach out, and I would be happy to talk you through substantively what is on your mind that will make you feel more confident stepping up to a microphone and expressing your views on important topics with the people that you share the Synod with. Felecia, do you have any other closing remarks?
Just a couple of things. One, I really appreciate you saying vote your conscience. And you are voting members, you are not delegates. So you were chosen at your annual meeting or however your congregation did that. You are voting your conscience. You are not, being lobbied by the congregation to vote a certain way about the things that show up on the floor. So we are clear in calling you voting members, not delegates. And then the other thing is, I think it will become more clear to you, the rules, once you get your packet of information. Because you'll get your red card and your green card and a white card. I think it's a white card. So if you want to go up to the mic and ask a question, you'll bring the white card. That's just a symbol that shows us that you're not speaking for or against a motion. You have a question, right? I think it will become clear once we're all sitting in the room together.
And that's all explained in, I think of it as the bulletin, but it's not the bulletin, it's the assembly
Thing.
bulletin. Okay,
Hmm.
all right.
Well then,
We'll see you at the assembly. Come in and stop in, and again, cookies, gluten-free.
thank you, everybody.